That's how I usually get it, is when I go,
Yeah, you always start like that.
yeah, but then I'm able to line up the video with the audio. But let's start this off different than normal, different than usual. Good evening, good morning, good day, good afternoon. Welcome to
Welcome.
Craig and Cindy, the podcast. We welcome you. We hope that if you're following and if you're watching and if you're enjoying what we have for you, we hope that you will subscribe. We hope that you aren't what they call a dine and dash. You're just kind of watching, no engagement. You know what I'm saying? Holler at us. Say something in the comments. We see that we're growing a little bit. Almost hit 100 followers. You know what I mean? But yeah, we just want to just reach out to you guys and engage with you. And hopefully, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that button, hit the notification button. I know that this is the stuff that people, the YouTubers say, and maybe I'm jumping on the bandwagon, but we just want to make sure that we're doing what we can do to get things out there to grow. I really believe that our message and the stuff that we're being inspired to speak on is very important. And I think that it's pertinent to the time. I think that it's something that will be timeless. Topics that we're hitting are things that you should be able to go back to 10 years from now. And so I don't know what the dance is. I don't know what the algorithm really is. But if I could encourage you to share this, if I could encourage you to subscribe and to commit to paying attention, I'm just going to do that. So this is my my attempt.
Is your appeal?
My appeal before the sermon. But yeah, so how you doing?
I'm good.
Good?
Yeah,
Good.
I'm good.
What's happened since the last time we sat down? I feel like sometimes life be life and then we just be like, you know what, let's do it tomorrow.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
what's I think it's, I mean, we still on point as far as weekly,
Yeah.
you know, but what has happened this week? God has been good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I wasn't even trying to go there, but like that's real. Like he's been real good, and
Yeah.
we've been seeing blessings and his grace and mercy, and things have been happening.
Yeah.
You know?
He is good. So it's really that we've been seeing it more. All right. So I've been open to see more of it more
Yeah.
clearly, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be a little overwhelming to just feel that love and to feel so blessed and to see how he operates and works in it. But yeah, God is good, you guys. And so I thought about something. I believe that the timing of this happens to be, and I'm not really trying to timestamp things, but this happens to be Independence Day week. You know, this is the week for the holiday, for July 4th. And I've just thought it was wild that in my studies, I was ending the book of Leviticus. I was finishing it out, and it was talking about the year of Jubilee, which is really all about freedom. So I thought it was interesting that I was studying and reading about freedom, and here we are coming into the week, Independence Day. And so I wondered, I was like, what are we going to talk about? You know, what's the Lord going to put on us this week? And it seemed to be a lot bigger than what I was expecting to speak on, but it was still based on freedom. And the topic that I believe that we're to speak on today is a topic that will probably be like a multi-part series so that we don't have to stretch it out into a 2-hour, 3-hour podcast. It's a deep topic, and I want to build foundation tonight. We want to talk about an amazing topic, which could be very beneficial to helping people with freedom, is the topic of bitterness. And what's interesting is that it was so broad and so much revelation was coming that for the first time, which I usually don't do, is I made some note cards. So I got some note cards, keep us on path, hopefully can stimulate some inspiration for contribution, but mostly to keep us on path so I don't take us too far deep into it. I even got a stopwatch set up right here.
You do?
Yeah, just because I usually don't even know how far we are in until the end. I'll look back and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's good to wrap up here. And so I got a clock going. I got a couple strong points I want to make to build foundation to move forward. And so I just, wanted to move into it slowly, but I am kind of excited to hit this topic running. Anything about your week or any way you can help us slide into it, or you just as excited?
I'm interested to hear what you have.
I think what's interesting in being involved in deliverance and being involved as long as we have, bitterness is, I would say, would you say top 5 easy? Top 3?
I mean, we wrote a book on forgiveness. We learned about the issue so deeply just from the deliverance ministry that
Yeah.
we heard all about it. We heard how it could last for generations. We learned the impact it has on people's mind and health. We've learned how difficult it is for someone to release it. We've learned so much about.
Yeah. And I think that that's the way we can maybe share and break that down here in this series, or however it stretches out, is really the key is like what you just said, that it affects so much.
Right.
Literally mental health, physical pain. There's just so much more than bad attitude or unforgiveness. And I think that's really, to bring up my first point, is that bitterness and unforgiveness are not synonymous. Bitterness is not unforgiveness. And I think that for years you can function in deliverance and treat it as if they're the same, because I guess it can be without consequence if you don't focus on being technical about what bitterness is. And the truth is that you can forgive and still have bitterness.
Could you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like literally have bitterness after you forgive and after the hard feelings are gone, after you can say, I wish this person the best, I bless them, you still have bitterness. And so the key is to understand that bitterness is actually the damage. It's not the ill feeling, it's the damage that was done by the person that you had to forgive.
It's interesting you say that because I just, as you're saying this, I remember a dream that I had maybe just a couple of days ago. And in my dream, a person that I have forgiven was in the dream. And in the dream, I could feel some type of resentment still there in my dream. Like that's my conscience.
Yeah, that's the
Like,
soul realm for
right,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
Like there was still something there, even though I have forgiven that person, have communication with this person, but it's like it was revealed that there was still something that I was still holding on to, some type of bitterness or resentment.
So that is soul trauma. And that's what we're talking about. The damage, the soul trauma, the trauma itself, the result of what was done by the person that you need to forgive, that is the bitterness. It's not the, I don't know if I would say the residual attitude or feelings that you still might have that might be out of your control, that you subconsciously might hold, but it's the actual ramifications of what they did. It's the stuff that we probably need therapy for. I would say that that's bitterness. And so defining forgiveness and bitterness is crucial. Understanding that forgiveness is removing or releasing the cause of the bitterness or the damage or the trauma. In the Greek, to forgive means to send away. It means to bid to go away or to depart. And I know we think of it as we just say, hey, no hard feelings, but it's to bid to go away, to depart, to send away. And so it's a releasing of something, and it's a releasing of the culprit. That is forgiveness. In Demystifying the Curse, the book that I've written, I go into a deeper definition of forgiveness, forgiveness of sin, what all those things mean. So it'd be cool to check that out. I'll probably put up a link to that book. However, the key is that we still need to deal with bitterness even after we've forgiven. We still need to deal with trauma even after forgiveness. This is why, as a deliverance minister, I can still say, like, hey, therapy could do you some good. Or, hey, more importantly, this is what the renewing of the mind is all about.
I could see how someone could not even recognize the bitterness at play in their life or in that relationship with that person or even other people because it's so deeply rooted. Like I'm picturing a marriage where maybe they've been married for a certain amount of time, length of time, and through manipulation or through anger or through everything, you've developed a way to be with each other, but there's still resentment from that treatment. And it's like you could learn how to not step on their toes or how to walk on eggshells or how to, go around conversations. But like that bitterness is there from being treated that way. That maybe at one point it was clear what was happening, but now you've lived with it for so long that you don't even recognize it anymore. And so I could see why some people call it inner healing or therapy would work in this situation because it's like you don't even recognize it anymore. It's been so long that this bitterness was birthed. You don't even know where it came from. Now you just know how to manage everything around it.
I think you're speaking to how I respond in situations, how I'm triggered. All those things are shaped and seen through a lens of my bitterness
Yes.
and wherever that bitterness came from. And so the confusion can be, is this bitterness because of what you did to me or because of this particular situation? Or is how you treated me, is that a triggering of
Right.
bitterness from who knows
Right.
childhood? Because that's what we're
Most
finding
likely.
most likely
Most
is
likely.
that the majority of people's issues and trauma and baggage actually comes from childhood and not necessarily the person that they feel they need to forgive. Oftentimes that person just triggered the
Right.
trauma.
It's funny. Sorry, I'm just I have a
Hmm.
lot of thoughts, but I remember early in our courtship, I remember like having some type of pride that I didn't bring any baggage from my previous relationship into ours,
Hmm.
thinking that the baggage that people bring is like, it was kind of like, he's not going to bother us. You know, like that was the baggage that I thought.
You thought he was gonna have like a boyfriend haunting the
I
relationship?
mean, a lot of people think that way. You know, you don't
Yeah.
have to worry about this person. Like, you
Yeah.
know, like they've moved on. You and I could move on. So it's like that baggage is gone.
Right.
Not knowing that the baggage that I was carrying was way, it was a heavy bag
Right.
that I didn't even know I was carrying. And
But it wasn't a person
it
physically.
was in a, I
Right.
mean, it got triggered a lot with this person,
Yeah.
but I assume you could leave it with that person. And
Mm.
it's not like that. And it clearly played out throughout our relationship and early marriage.
I think that's interesting because I have this analogy that I liken two relationships. But if any of you guys remember, we recently had to evict a tenant. And so our eviction of that tenant was actually us forgiving the tenant. We forgave the tenants because they were the cause of the bitterness. And so the bitterness is the damage that, if you remember, and maybe I'll put a clip up, the damage done to our home, that was there was a lot of bitterness. There was a lot of trauma, a lot of damage. We're talking holes in walls. We're talking dog poop on carpet, crusted and dried for months. We're talking smoke, smell in the walls, lots of damage. And so the bitter is what they left behind.
Right.
We forgave them. We sent them off, didn't try to sue them, didn't try to pursue nothing. We released them. But there was bitterness left behind. And so this is the key point, is that we had to deal with that bitterness before we could do anything with the house. Our goal is to sell the home. And so we had to get new carpet. We had to repaint the house,
Deep clean.
deep clean. We had to
Smoke.
hire some smoke company to come get the smell out. There was a lot that had to be
Yeah.
invested in putting this house back out on the market. And so this is likened to people in relationships. You may have split amicably. You may have forgiven that person for how they treated you or whatever they put you through. But if you had some long, toxic type relationship, you forgiving them and releasing them, there's still damage that needs to be handled before you put yourself back out on the market. I believe that we can stop right there, literally end the podcast at 10 minutes and be like, okay, that was deep. Understand that the damage is the part that we need to handle and address before putting ourselves back on the market. We think that if we have an amicable relationship and we cool and that person's not going to come and interfere and deal with what I'm doing next, that we good.
Right.
When the truth is that the bitterness itself and the damage and the trauma is what needs to be handled and dealt with.
Yeah.
And so I just likened it to our situation with the house. And so I thought it was interesting is that on the outside, we
That was
rolled up to the
nice.
house before we actually even had confronted the tenant. And we was like, oh, we good. Like, it's straight.
We thought we just needed to clean the house. Honestly, we thought it was just going to be a deep clean. We had scheduled the person, and then we postponed it because we realized it was so much more.
Yeah. And there was so much going on inside. And if you recall, like how nasty it was, the key is to understand that, and I think this is the key, like if I was taking notes, the key is to understand it is that bitterness is triggered, or your trauma or the damage can be triggered by the perception of an unmet need. So in the case with the house, the unmet need was rent.
Right.
They weren't paying rent. And so that triggered something. We had to figure out what was going on. And so months go by without paying rent. So this unmet need is happening. If it were not for that, we would have never discovered what these people were doing to our house.
Right.
I don't know what a year more gone by they could have done to that house had there not been this triggering, had there not been this revelation or exposure of bitterness. And so bitterness is triggered and exposed by a perceived unmet need. And so that's really kind of the next lesson that I want to take you to, is to discuss that and how that works. A way to say it practically is a teenager might perceive an unmet need in his parent and how he was raised. He might feel like he wasn't loved in the way he expected, or he didn't get the protection that he expected, or his parents didn't try to understand him in the way that he deserved. And so that would be an unmet need, which would cause a triggering of the bitterness.
Yeah.
Same with a man and his wife. A man can feel that there's an unmet need maybe in the bed when it comes to respect. It can be an unmet need when it comes to just a woman's nurturing. And that can stimulate some bitterness in a man toward his wife. And if we look biblically, we can look at the children of Israel in the wilderness. And they had a lot of bitterness toward Moses.
Yeah.
There was unmet need, and they was just like, yo, Moses, we need water. Yo, Moses, we need food. We need meat. Yo, Moses, it's hot. You know what I'm saying? There was just a lot of unmet need. And so it triggered their bitterness. And the key is to understand is that what was triggered was actually from Egypt. The bitterness and the damage and the trauma, it was not Moses there's nothing he did. It was just the fact that they looked to him for this unmet need. And because of disappointment, because of the resentment, because of, this unmet need, they were triggered. And so that's the wilderness experience. Slavery was the cause of their bitterness. The life in Egypt was the cause of their bitterness.
Right.
And so that's what I'm trying to point here is bitterness stimulated and exposed by unmet need. Bitterness, not unforgiveness. Bitterness is damage or trauma from what needed to be forgiven. I hope I'm being real clear here. So if we're talking bitterness as a trauma, we're saying that we're dealing with a mentality.
Yeah.
And when I say mentality, I'm talking about how you respond to the triggers, how you respond to whatever the situation is. It's going to be seen through this goggle or this lens of your trauma. This is why we needed the wilderness season. This is why the need for the trauma mentality to be dealt with. This is why I just think it was such a genius play to take them through this season, because he understood that he took them out of Egypt, but he needed to take Egypt out of them. And he needed to prepare them to be put back on the market, because he was marketing them as children of God. And so one cool thing that I never noticed before is that all the way through, up until maybe the promised land, it was always, I'm the God of your fathers, or I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's pretty much was his tagline. Not until they get to the promised land do you really start hearing the children of God, or I'm the God of the children of Israel, or and it was almost like he didn't even claim them until he took them through this purification process in the wilderness. And so I liken them to a house that he was restoring before he could put it on the market. When we speak about houses in the spiritual sense, we're talking about a bloodline. We're talking about bloodline. We're talking about the children of Israel, the relatives of Abraham. And so he was trying to restore this house before he put them back on the market, because you as a child of God, you are a business card. You represent him. And so before he could put them on the market and put his name and tag on them, he had some things to work through. And there was this slave mentality he wanted to deal with. And the wilderness, genius. And why do I say that? Is because if he needed to trigger all this baggage, all this trauma and damage to see what's going on with these people, what better place than your wilderness season is the season of unmet need. Like even you personally, your wilderness season is the season of dryness. It's a season where things get hot. The wilderness is a barren place. It's a place where there's just not a lot of life. It's a place where you don't got a bunch of trees for shade. And so they would require shade to protect them from the heat. So that's an unmet need. It's a dry place so that there's just not an abundance of water. It's an unmet need.
Yeah.
And
Sounds
so
like
it's just
children.
yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. Like children basically definitely can trigger some things.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So unmet need is a trigger to cause to manifest.
Yeah.
They manifested. Whenever they needed water, they manifested. Whenever they needed food or they were like, we want meat, they was tripping. Like anything that could get them to trigger was an unmet need. And so the wilderness provided this place for him to show them that they were needy, but he created this neediness by bringing them here in order to trigger or to reveal all this trauma. So by having them in the wilderness, there's going to be a need for cooling in the daytime, like a shade. And so here Abba comes with this cloud.
Yeah.
There's going to be a need for some warmth at nighttime. Here Abba comes with this fire. There's going to be need for water. I think day 3 they was tripping.
Mm-hmm.
Here Abba comes with the water from a rock. They're going to need meat, or they're going to complain about not having meat or sustenance. Here Abba comes with everything falling from the sky. And the key that I want to put out just to set up the foundation for the next one is to understand that, for one, Abba means source. He's the father, but they didn't know that.
Right. They hadn't met him yet.
They didn't know that, right?
No idea.
400 years in slavery, he was not Lord in Egypt. He showed himself to be Lord of Lords with the plagues. But that 400 years, that generational bondage that they went through, if you can think about your bondage, if you can think about before you came out of your bondage or before you opened your eyes to the light, you were in a place where he was not the Lord of your life. Yeah. And so in Egypt, Pharaoh was God. And then he had gods. You know what I'm saying? They were that way, and they could not worship him in Egypt because they worshiped the animals. So you couldn't have like sacrifices and stuff like that. So there was no real connection to the Father then. And once again, he wasn't claiming them either. These were Abraham's relatives, and I'm Abraham's God. And I'm going to deal with Moses out here in the wilderness while you guys are crying out. And so there was really no connection there. And so the wilderness was also to establish this personal connection with God, with the Father, as like, yo, I'm the guy.
Right.
I'm the one you come to. I'm the one you look to. The reason why you have this perceived unmet need is because you're being disappointed, because you're going to the wrong place for your needs to be met. They would always go to Moses. They wanted water, they wanted the meat. It was always Moses getting complained to. Imagine you're the man and 1 million, 2 million people complaining to you for their needs. And that is what he's trying to expose and show them, that it's me. I'm the source. I'm the one that you come to. That's just very important, because the more we look to other people and we put that responsibility on them, the more we come into resentment and disappointment.
Yeah.
Because they're going to fail.
Yeah, because we need him too. We're searching for him too.
They will fail.
Right.
And it's even set up that way so that he can be God.
Right.
He brought them out so that he can be their God.
So he could be trusted.
Yeah. And so that wilderness period that we go through, it's genius.
Yeah.
He's seeking to show you, look, you've been looking to the wrong places. And I understand that while you're in your season in Egypt, or before your eyes were open, you didn't know any better. You didn't know me. And so, of course, you went to the wrong person, and you were going to the wrong places for satisfaction, the wrong places for sustenance, the wrong places for provision and protection. You know, you're pissed off because you feel like your homie, you know, he didn't have your back. You know, you're supposed to have my back, dog. You know, you're supposed to protect me. You're supposed to look out for me. You're supposed to cover me.
Right.
Disappointed. So now you're triggered. You look at your parents, you have your expectations. You look at a boyfriend for protection. You look at a girlfriend for nurturing or respect or sex or whatever it is. We're looking everywhere else for what we feel we need when he is the source of all, and he's trying to show us that, look, you got to come to me.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, this unmet need is going to do nothing but trigger your trauma. And you're going to respond from the place of trauma, which is you're going to either respond too passionately. It's going to be way bigger than it is. It's going to blow up out of proportion. Like, you responding from a place of trauma is not necessarily proportionate to what's actually happening in front of you. This essentially was just a trigger. And so understanding that your unmet need is simply something that's triggering your trauma, dealing with that trauma is so critical. And once again, how we deal with that is from the renewal of the mind, from scripture and from handling and dealing with the strongholds. In the meantime, if you're looking to him, you don't have to worry about so much triggering.
Yeah.
And so understanding that I'm looking to him, that's not going to solve my baggage or solve my drama or my trauma. That's the renewing of the mind. That's my season in finding a therapist and all the other stuff. But in the process, I'm also going through this process where I'm looking to depend more on him and look to him as the source of everything that I need. So also this is pre-promise. So whatever you're dealing with in your wilderness season, you have to understand that this is him readying you for your promised land, for promise, for your destiny, whatever it is. He's trying to change your mentality so that you don't take a slave mentality into, or you don't take your baggage into the promised land. Like, you can't have that here. When we say trigger, it's really more about just exposure.
Yeah.
Like
Make it visible.
Yeah, in deliverance, our goal is to trigger the demon or to cause it to manifest. That's oftentimes the best way that we see it, or the person sees it so that they can believe, like, yo, this is happening. That's a demon. Demons are real. Like, to really actually experience that, you got to trigger it. You got to reveal it. I always say that if he reveals it, he aims to heal it.
Yeah.
So the revelation of what's being dealt with is very important, so that you can see that it needs to be dealt with, and you can see that he's here to deal with it and help you with it. The triggering is part of your healing process, your deliverance process. So you have to understand that if you are going through your wilderness season, you should expect lots of triggering. You should expect that you're going to manifest in ways you may not have expected, but you can also expect that it's not necessarily the torment that you might imagine, but it is him showing you what he aims to heal.
Yeah. It becomes a good thing. It becomes something that you start expecting.
Yeah.
I think for me, it became seasons of like, okay, I've been triggered a lot in impatience. And once I started seeing it, like the thing, like how much impatience triggered me, and the little things and the bigger things, like I realized we were in a season together. And it's just like, now it's like, okay, what else is in me? What else is triggering this?
Yeah, you start looking forward to it.
I do, you know, where's the root of it? You know, do I need to forgive someone for it? Like, is there any residual trauma, bitterness, resentment?
Yeah.
What seeds have I planted in my circle, my family, or my kids that produce bad fruit and teach me how to do it right, or teach me how to respond your way? So it really becomes a relationship.
Yeah.
You know, like a divine romance.
He's holding your hand.
He is.
He's walking you through.
Yeah. So it's like you look forward to him exposing those things versus you wanting to hide or sweep it under the rug or try to pretend it's not really there.
Yeah. And so your season of need or unmet need is your wilderness.
Yeah.
And so why I say wilderness is so genius is that wilderness was pretty much like a petri dish, or this controlled environment for this experiment, where he could like poke and prod and trigger and stimulate these things that you would never want to be exposed in your promise.
Right.
In that boardroom meeting, in that opportunity that you have, or whatever it is, he would not want you to embarrass yourself, and he would rather you bleed out in the wilderness or expose those things in the wilderness. And in that season, it's also a season of isolation. And so in that wilderness season where you're isolated and you're not so much involved in that promise, this is the best time to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, it's genius. It's an isolated experience. It's a controlled environment. It's a petri dish. It's a straight up genius scientific experiment where he's just like, let me open them up and deal with this stuff here prior to.
It's like a supernatural heart surgery.
Yeah, yeah. And the triggers that expose your issues are your needs. And so, like I said before, the wilderness is a space where there's a need for food, there's a need for water, there's a need for shade from the heat, there's a need for light from the darkness. So much stuff that they would need to depend on him for. It's like he created this place of dependency so that he could step in and be God.
Yeah.
And they could see that he is that. And they can see that he didn't disappoint. Even when they would complain and trip about trivial stuff, he still made it happen for them.
Right.
And so he showed them that I'm God, I'm source, I'm the one that you come to. I don't disappoint. You don't have to worry about that with me. But as long as they were looking in the wrong place and they're going complaining and crying to Moses and not realizing where they're supposed to go, it's the same with us. You know, our expectation of each other, like it's expectation management, really, to realize that I have to look to him first before I look to my wife to satisfy my needs. You know what I mean? So yeah, once again, wilderness, Jesus, very genius, very genius. It's also a critical teaching series where he's teaching them, I am Abba, I am source. Everything comes from me. If there's the lesson from the wilderness, because like I said, like you can trigger someone's trauma and not necessarily go for the healing or actually do anything about it. You could just be triggering it. But understanding how to manage that is healthy as well. And he's showing them, he's teaching them, like, look, you don't look here for that. You look here. I'm source, I'm Abba. And it's also about establishing that relationship as like, yo, I'm your father. And so we needed that. And if you look back at your wilderness season, you'll see that it's more aimed at a time for intimacy and just growing in personal relationship with the Father and being able to trust him so that you can depend on him instead of some of your patterns in which you looked in the wrong place. You can look to your addictions for security or the escape or just as a need to fulfill a need. There's so much that you look to that you're replacing. And now he's like, yo, let me handle that instead. Come to me for that instead. And so the wilderness, man, it's crazy how I can look in retrospect. And I think that that's what the wilderness is about, is that the children of Israel didn't know what he was doing. They couldn't have known that.
Right.
And so typically in our wilderness season, while we're in it, oftentimes as we get towards the end of it and he's showing and exposing a lot of this stuff to us, even now, you start to realize like, oh, that's what the wilderness season was for. Oh, thank you. Like you're grateful for it. It's almost like you're grateful that he didn't take you straight out of bondage right into your promise so you can just pee all over that. He didn't take you right out of bondage into your promise with all your slave mentality. He knows you would have messed it up. And you can be grateful and realize that as much as you thought you was dope, as much as you thought you were ready for success or ready for whatever he had for you because I'm saved now, you can just be grateful to realize that you would have really jacked that thing up.
I mean, even just what you would miss what you would miss from going through it. From really understanding.
Yeah,
I feel
gratitude.
Like,
That's what I
feel
mean.
like I understand life. The perspective of life is so much different just going through that myself, where it's just like, oh my gosh, we're so blind to the issues of the heart, the condition of the heart, how everything is rooted in the heart, the soul realm. We're so blind to it. I look at the world now and I'm like, they're seeking mental health. There's, leave me alone, love me the way I am. And I'm just like, it's so hard to understand unless you've gone through that season with God, who is the only healer, to truly understand what the world is truly suffering from. And so that wisdom and that understanding and even just the process individually, I want this understanding.
Yeah. What's crazy though is that I feel like it's easy to say that now.
Yeah, of course.
Because I feel like it's like retrospect wisdom. Oh, now I see what he was doing.
You know what? I think at first you're just like, whoa, what's going on? What is happening? And then, you have some really hard moments, some really hard seasons where you don't know what he's asking for.
Yeah.
because maybe you've never gone through it before. Maybe you don't even recognize it in yourself. I remember going through him exposing pride in me. I had no clue the way it looked inside. The way it looked in me, I didn't know how it looked.
Yeah.
And it took me a while, but I knew there was something that I was struggling with that he was trying to show me. And it's like once he did, it was like, oh, okay, this is how we do it. So it's like there's moments that are very tough, but after doing it for so long, that's when you get to a point where you're just like, oh, he's with me. Oh, let's do this. What else do you want to show me? It's the same as any relationship where it's like that trust is being built. You might go in and being like, nah, I'm good. I don't have any baggage.
Right.
And then you meet, you have conflict. You want to push that person away. But with that person's love and that person's nurturing and respect for you, you stay and you begin to trust that person. And even though there's times where you still struggle and things inside of you like want to fight that person or want to push that person away or want to isolate yourself, you start building something. Yeah. I really think that's how our relationship started from my perspective, from my side, where it was like, at first it was like, yeah, let's hang out. And then it was like, whoa, too close, It's
like a trauma cycle though. Is what I'm seeing is where I can trigger maybe some trauma in you.
Very much so.
But it's not necessarily, and the trauma is stimulated by what I did, right? And then on the other end, there's just the trauma that you just carry. You just react in certain ways because of your trauma. And so there's me being like the origin of just triggering things because whoever caused the damage is not here anymore.
Right.
But then there's just the origin of it all, which is just the damage that's there. And so it's either me triggering something or just you functioning from your trauma. But either way, whether it's the origin of it or if it's the cause of it, it's all trauma. And it's just this cycle where you're functioning out of your trauma and you think you're just responding to something I said. You think that you're just responding to dealing with unmet need. You think that's what it is, but you're actually functioning out of the baggage that you claim to not have, or you're functioning out of the damage that was done. Yeah. And so that is how things can become toxic when the damage is not taken care of or handled.
Yeah. I feel like this could go so deep because so many of us, I know every person, I don't think there's a person in this world that doesn't have to go through that or isn't struggling with that. And it's in cycles.
Admitting and understanding that it's not me or not you or not the person that is the cause.
Yeah.
What you're dealing with, how you've responded is based on the trauma. And so just like when they came out of Egypt and they were thirsty, and remember they started tripping like, man, in Egypt we had this, or in Egypt things were like this. And that was just their trauma speaking.
Yeah.
That was their slave mentality. That was all from Egypt. That had nothing to do with Moses not having water on deck.
Right.
It had nothing to do with that. That was Egypt speaking. And so sometimes you have to catch yourself and say, man, was that Egypt speaking?
Right.
I think that if there's anything you get out of that, is to understand. Sometimes you got to check yourself and say, man, was that Egypt speaking? Or am I putting too much on this person or this situation?
Yeah. I think we have a very natural tendency to deflect because we can't see it in ourselves. We've been living with it. Like you said, we respond with it. We live with it that we don't even, we can't recognize. I can't recognize pride in myself. I can't it just, everything looks so legitimate because it's kind of like it solidifies. I mean, and it's really talking about like deliverance and demons and how they build strongholds, but it's just like it solidifies. See, I was right. My theory on the way men are with women, like you just prove that. But I can't see that it was actually me who has that mindset.
Yeah.
That has been cycled because I've seen a lot of men, do this, or I've seen.
But what's crazy about it is that you don't realize it, that your carpets are stinking. That you got holes in your walls. You don't realize. And so I'm just back to our tenants. As disgusted as we were cleaning up and going through that place.
Oh.
It's very possible that they didn't realize.
They lived that way.
This is how they lived.
I think of that often. I was like, I didn't even want to touch the sheets. You saw the sheets.
They slept in the sheets. They ate in the bed. They had sex in that bed.
In those sheets.
This was their home. This is how they lived.
Like when I saw the couch, I was like, I remember like you even telling the girls like, oh, don't touch the cushions. I was like, this is where they relaxed.
Yeah.
This is where they slept.
Yeah.
But, back to like, that was me. Like I look back sometimes and I was like, oh, Jesus, I responded that way. I reacted that way. I could say that now because I could see the inside of the house. I could see everything that I was carrying.
Mm-hmm.
And now I could look back and I was like, ew.
Now you see the poop on the carpet.
I see
Now
it
you smell the
clearly.
smoke in the walls. Yeah.
Man, it was worse probably than the house that we could just cleaned up. But very recently I realized that family members, not just immediate family members, but even extended family, mostly like aunts or uncles or cousins, how much of an influence they have on you, because they're the family that's surrounding you, you know, in your childhood. And I was thinking back at my upbringing, and I grew up around a lot of family. So I'm like, they were around. I was picking up from their cues. I was picking up from their responses. I was picking up from their language. And like immediately it was like the Lord showed me like, you're not a shy girl. That's what the world says. That's what, you know, like you were described at, and what you received is that you were scared because of the way people responded to you. I remember we lived in a fourplex, and there was a family. It was pretty much all family, but my mom would send me across the driveway to my aunt's house to like get a cup of sugar or, you know, anything. And they would come, we would go over. And every time I'd step over, I remember, I even felt this when the Lord was showing this to me, that I always was scared that my aunt's son, she wasn't my aunt, so I wouldn't call him a cousin. She was like a extended family friend, or my mom's second or third cousin.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I called her my aunt. But I was afraid that my cousin would be there, because every time I came in, he always had something to say. It was just a response. It was never mean. You could just tell in his tone. I was little, you know, younger than 10, but he always had something to say. And so I always feared seeing him just on my way across the driveway into the home to ask for this. He was muting me. And this fear was like getting stronger and higher, that I'm like, people interpreted that as she's shy. It was like, no, I was scared. I was scared of people's responses. I was scared of how, I don't know, I guess, the response, the response that he was giving me and the way he was not receiving me, it scared me as a little girl.
Yeah.
And so it shaped my communication. It shut me down. It shut me up. And then people are just like, oh, she's just shy.
Wow. When in essence you were functioning from a place of bitterness, or you were functioning from the trauma of having to deal with that.
It wasn't until going through this, you know, within the last 5-6 years, that I realized I'm not shy. I was never shy.
Yeah.
I was scared.
Wow.
And so imagine I'm going decades of just like, oh, I'm shy. So it's just like, you take yourself out of rooms, you take yourself out of conversations. Like it follows you.
Yeah.
This identity follows you to the point that you might even speak it on your children. Oh, they're shy too, or they're introverted, or they're, you know, it's just like, no, I never learned how to cope with people's responses in a healthy way.
And what's crazy is that you're carrying previous trauma or past trauma. We carry that in the soul realm.
Very much so.
And so even though we hadn't gone there so much yet, but just understand that the damage and the stuff that's there, it's been there and it's there already. And so if it's there already, we're really talking about spiritual entities.
Yeah.
We're talking about how we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We're talking about spirits. We're talking about stuff that is just being given permission to stay and just hang around, you know, because we haven't really identified it. It hadn't been revealed. We just think that the current situation is what's happening. We don't realize that we're responding from a different place, from a different realm. We're responding from trauma. We're responding from bitterness, because bitterness or the damage from past trauma is already in your soul. That trigger tends to cause you to overreact or respond from that trauma or out of that bitterness. It makes it harder to respond to that trigger out of a place of love. This is because that spiritual entity is not a Holy Spirit. So you're not going to respond with the fruit of the Spirit if you have a different spirit that you're going to be responding from or reacting from. That is bitterness. That is soul trauma. I have here to wrap it up right here, actually. Yeah. And I have 3 points that I wanted to make to just say, hey, this is our foundation before we continue this conversation. One is that bitterness is not unforgiveness. It is the result of the damage done by whatever it was you needed to forgive. Got it? Bitterness is triggered by a perceived unmet need, especially when we seek someone other than the Father to meet that need. A close friend of mine, Israel, I've been talking to, and I want to quote him. He said this. He said, Whether a need is truly unmet or it is perceived as unmet, it has the potential to cause soul trauma. Either way, it is damaging, thus causing or triggering more bitterness.
Right.
I was like, wow, that's heavy. And then the third point that I want you guys to take home with this before, just to munch on and digest, to come back with, is the Father will put you in situations to trigger that bitterness, to show you it is there with the intention of healing it.
Yeah.
The journey of healing is called the renewing of the mind. This is the purpose of your wilderness season.
Yeah.
Is to take you through a journey of healing, to renew your mind, to get you out of the slave mentality so you're not responding and reacting from a place of bitterness or from a place of soul trauma, from a place of baggage and damage. That is the wilderness process. That is the healing process. That is deliverance. That is not just them coming out of Egypt, but the process of the wilderness was also the healing process, the deliverance process as well. Maybe more like strongholds than the demonic, but it's all part of their salvation. It's all part of our salvation, in which, in retrospect, I'm super grateful.
Yeah.
When I'm going through it, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? Why am I going through this? Why is this all this being triggered? To the point where it almost feels supernatural, like he's doing it, you know. But now with the revelation here, it's kind of just like, wow, what else you got?
Right.
I'm in the closet, like, purify my heart, God, purify my, show me more.
Right.
You know, what is, if you reveal it, we will heal it. You know, and so now I'm just like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's typically in retrospect that we have this revelation, and he's already kind of took us through the ringer. And I believe that's why we had the revelation last week that the worst is behind us. If we're at this point now where we have this revelation, it's probably because we've gone through so much soul trauma healing. We can look back and see it in retrospect and look at it in a different lens.
Yeah.
And so
Man.
that's why I believe that word that I had, the prophetic word that I had, saying that the worst part is already behind you. I believe that that's why we're here with this revelation right here.
Yeah. And I believe a lot of people listening are having a lot of memories come up.
Yeah.
So I just encourage you to pray just in a surrender, that you're expectant and that you're willing.
Yeah.
You're willing to, for him to expose the things that you probably didn't see, probably that other people have pointed out, but you haven't wanted to accept.
Yeah. And pray for him to soften your heart, so that as we step into the conversation next week, you'll be willing to receive. Because what I want to do is to go deeper and really make the connection between bitterness and physical pain, bitterness and just some of our common struggles with mental health.
Yeah.
To make that connection, like, you just got to really be open in a different space to hear that. But I'm hoping that with this foundation that we built tonight, you should be able to just sit with it differently and in a way that can be healing for you rather than just jarring, you know, or triggering.
Yeah.
I believe that since you're in that space where the worst is behind you, that you've been through a lot of triggering, and the triggering and the things that he's shown you and the things that he's been healing you of. I believe that we're just going into that season where there's just the little tweaks here and there. Now you're just like, now he's really, really filtering some things and really doing some deep stuff that you definitely wouldn't expect.
Man.
You'd be like, whoa, where did that come from?
Right.
You know, and I just think that we're in that season together. It's probably why there's just 92 of us right now. You know, we're just we're a small little tribe, kind of transitioning into the promise. That's kind of how I look at it. I'm in my early promise stage, and so we can reflect on what he's done in the wilderness and be grateful. So yeah, man. I hope that blessed you guys. I hope that you're just like, whoa, I gotta watch that again. Whoa, I never looked at bitterness in this way. I never looked at unmet need in this way. I never realized how much I look to other people as source rather than my Father. And, you know, just having a different perspective of your wilderness season and seeing the necessity of it rather than, or the genius of it, rather than, I got to go through this before my promise. You know?
It's a beautiful thing. You'll be so thankful. You'll be on your knees weeping often for what he's, because it's like if he's the one exposing it, he's there.
Amen.
It's him.
Yeah. 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 And like I said, he'll put you in the situation to expose,
Yeah.
to reveal it
Yeah.
for the healing.
Yeah.
If he reveals it, he aims to heal it. That's just what it is, how he operates. That's his MO.
Yeah. All right.
Yep, I'm tapping out. That's all I got for today.
Yeah. Sounds good.
You want to play me out? You let me get this far. I still went farther than I planned to, but I'm happy with what we got tonight.
All right. Play you out.
All right.
We say shalom to say hello. Shalom to say goodbye. Shalom, may you live in peace. We say shalom to say hello. Shalom to say goodbye.
Shalom, may you live in peace.
We say shalom.
Hit that like, subscribe, notification button. Peace and blessings. I'll see you guys next week.
Good night.